The air in the private dining room of New York's per se restaurant was worth more than most people's homes, thick with the scent of money and ambition. On the table lay a contract worth $10 billion. Billionaire industrialist Logan Knight, a titan forged in steel and microchips, was about to sign away his life's work. The pen hovered over the paper, a moment of finality. But from the shadows, a voice, a mere whisper from the waitress clearing their plates, cut through the silence. "Mr. Knight." She breathed her voice, trembling but firm. "Don't sign this." One sentence from a woman who had nothing aimed at a man who had everything. That whisper didn't just stop the pen. It was about to ignite a firestorm that would expose a conspiracy years in the making and change their lives forever. The pressure in the room was a physical entity. It sat on Logan Knight's shoulders, a familiar weight he had carried for 40 years, while building Knight Innovations from a garage workshop into a global technological empire. At 68, his hair was the color of polished silver, his face a roadmap of sleepless nights and hard-won victories. Across the gleaming mahogany table, Gideon Reed, the CEO of Nexus Corp, smiled. It was a young man's smile, all teeth and predatory confidence. He looked like he was sculpted from the very future he sold, sleek, efficient, and devoid of sentiment. A truly historic moment, Logan. Gideon said, his voice smooth as the aged scotch in their glasses. "The fusion of your legacy with our vision. We'll honor what you've built." Logan grunted, his eyes scanning the final page of the acquisition agreement. $10 billion. An obscene number enough to secure his family for generations. Yet it felt like selling his soul. Knight Innovations wasn't just a company. It was a testament to his late wife, Helen, who had believed in him when he was just a kid with a soldering iron and a dream. The centerpiece of the deal was Project Chimera, a revolutionary energy storage technology his team had perfected, the very technology that made his company irresistible to Nexus Corp. Beside him, Walter Higgins, his CFO and friend of 3 decades, gave a reassuring nod. "Everything is in order, Logan. The lawyers from Sullivan and Cromwell have triple-checked every clause. It's the deal of a lifetime." Logan trusted Walter more than any man alive. They'd started together, faced down recessions, hostile takeovers, and personal tragedies. Walter was his rock. If Walter said it was good, it was good. He picked up the custom-made Mont Blanc pen, its weight a final solemn reminder of the decision. The ink was poised to flow, to sign away his past, and secure a quiet if hollow future. It was then that she moved. The waitress had been a ghost in the room for the past 2 hours, refilling water glasses and clearing plates with silent, unobtrusive grace. Logan had barely registered her presence. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with dark, watchful eyes and an air of quiet intensity. As she reached for Gideon's empty bread plate, she leaned closer to Logan, her body shielding the movement from the others at the table. Her whisper was so faint, it was almost a thought. "Mr. Knight, for your own sake. Don't sign this." The word struck him like a jolt of ice water. He flinched his head, snapping up to look at her. Her eyes met his for a fraction of a second. They held no hint of madness or mischief, only a desperate, profound sincerity. Then just as quickly she straightened up her face, a mask of professional neutrality. "Will there be anything else, gentlemen?" Gideon Reed laughed, oblivious. "Just the bill, my dear. And another bottle of the 82 Lafite to celebrate." But Logan's world had tilted on its axis. The pen in his hand suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. He looked at the signature line, then back at the waitress as she retreated towards the kitchen door. Who was she? A corporate spy, a disgruntled employee, a madwoman, Logan. Walter's voice was laced with concern. "Are you all right?" Logan's mind raced. Every instinct, honed by a lifetime of navigating shark-infested corporate waters, was screaming at him. The girl's eyes. There was no angle, no play for money or fame. It was a warning. A genuine, terrified warning. To ignore it felt like stepping off a cliff with his eyes closed. He placed the pen down on the table with a deliberate click that echoed in the silent room. Gideon's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Second thoughts. Logan forced a tired smile, a mask of his own. No. Just a moment of reflection. It's a big step. He looked at Walter. You know my hand is cramping. 40 years of signing paychecks, I suppose. He flexed his fingers for effect. Let's have that celebratory drink. We can finalize the signing at the office tomorrow morning. I want this to be done on home turf in the building Helen helped me design. The excuse was flimsy, almost insulting, but it was the only thing he could think of. Walter looked confused, but nodded in deference. Of course, Logan, whatever you wish. Gideon's eyes narrowed. The predatory gleam was replaced by a flicker of cold assessment. He had sensed the shift. The deal was no longer a certainty. Tomorrow morning, then, he said, his voice losing its earlier warmth. My team will be ready. As the dinner concluded, with forced pleasantries and brittle smiles, Logan couldn't shake the image of the waitress's face. He needed to find her. He needed to know why a young woman serving $500 entrees would risk her entire livelihood to whisper 5 words that could potentially save or ruin his. As he left the restaurant, he discreetly slipped a $100 bill to the maître d'. The waitress who served our private room. Logan said, his voice low. I need her name, and I need to know when she finishes her shift. The maître d' hesitated, but the authority in Logan's voice, combined with the crisp bill, was persuasive. Her name is Reese Butler. She finishes at 11. Logan nodded, stepping out into the cool New York night. He would wait. For the first time in months, the crushing weight of the deal was replaced by something else, a dangerous, terrifying, and utterly consuming curiosity. The alley behind the Michelin-starred restaurant smelled of discarded gourmet dreams and damp cardboard. Logan Knight, a man accustomed to climate-controlled town cars and private jets, felt profoundly out of place, leaning against the cold brick wall. He'd sent his driver home, preferring the anonymity of the shadows. At precisely 11:05 p.m., the heavy steel door creaked open, and she emerged. Reese Butler looked different without the crisp uniform. In jeans and a worn jacket, she looked younger, more vulnerable. She clutched a tote bag to her chest like a shield and started walking her pace, quick and determined. Miss Butler? Logan called out, his voice softer than he intended. She froze, her body tensing as she spun around. Her eyes widened in fear when she saw him, a predator from the world she had just disrupted. Her hand instinctively tightened on her bag. I'm not here to cause you trouble, Logan said quickly, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. You took an incredible risk tonight. I need to know why. She eyed him with deep suspicion. They'll fire me. I know you'll have me fired. On the contrary, he said, taking a careful step closer. You may have just saved me from the biggest mistake of my life, or you've involved me in a very elaborate corporate prank. Either way, I'm not leaving until you tell me what you know. Her shoulders slumped slightly, the fight draining out of her, replaced by a weary resignation. She glanced up and down the empty alley. Not here. They walked in silence for several blocks before arriving at a pre-war tenement building in Hell's Kitchen. The journey was a descent through the city's economic strata, from the gilded peaks of Midtown to the gritty reality of rent-controlled apartments with rattling pipes. Her place was small, sparsely furnished, but impeccably clean. A bookshelf overflowing with textbooks on engineering and physics dominated one wall. "You're a student?" Logan asked, surprised. "Night classes at Cooper Union," she said, not meeting his eye as she double-locked the door. "My father was an engineer. He wanted me to follow him." She gestured to a small, wobbly kitchen table. As Logan sat, he felt the immense gap between their worlds. The chair probably cost less than the tie he was wearing. "My name is Reese Butler," she began, her voice gaining strength. "My father was Dimitri Butler. He was your lead engineer at the R&D lab in Poughkeepsie. He worked for you for 15 years. The name struck a distant but clear chord. "Dimitri. Yes, I remember. Brilliant man. A bit of a maverick. He passed away, didn't he? A heart attack about 5 years ago." Reese's jaw tightened. "That's the official story." She hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. From her tote bag, she pulled out a thick, leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. She slid it across the table. "My father's work journal," she said. "He wrote in it every single day." Logan opened it. The pages were filled with dense, elegant handwriting, complex equations, and intricate diagrams. He flipped through his eyes, catching dates, project code names, and familiar technical jargon. "Look at the last 6 months of his entries." Reese instructed her, finger tracing a date. Logan turned to the section. He began to read, and a cold dread started to seep into his bones. Dimitri Butler was describing in painstaking detail the foundational principles of a new energy storage system. He called it the Helios Matrix. It was a design so elegant, so revolutionary, it made Logan's breath catch. It was also without a single doubt the core architecture of Project Chimera, the $10 billion technology he was about to sell. Gideon Reed was a junior project manager back then. Reese said, her voice low and laced with old pain. "He was assigned to my father's team. My dad liked him, thought he was bright. He mentored him. He shared everything with him." The journal entries confirmed it. Dimitri wrote of long sessions with a promising young gun, GR, who was quick to grasp the theoreticals. "Then," Reese continued, her voice trembling with suppressed rage, "my father started having difficulties. His data was being corrupted. Prototypes were failing in inexplicable ways. He was working 18-hour days, growing paranoid, convinced someone was sabotaging him. He made a formal complaint to his supervisor." "Walter Higgins." Logan breathed the name, leaving a sour taste in his mouth. Reese nodded grimly. "Mr. Higgins launched an internal review. 2 weeks later, my father was put on administrative leave. The report concluded he was suffering from extreme stress and burnout, that his paranoia was affecting the team, and that the Helios Matrix project was unviable. They said he was chasing a fantasy. It broke his spirit. 2 weeks after that, he had his heart attack. He was only 52. Logan felt sick. He remembered the incident now. Walter had handled it. He'd presented it as a sad but necessary decision. "Dimitri's lost his edge, Logan. He's becoming a liability. We have to shelve the project and let him go." He had trusted his friend. A month after my father died, Reese said, her eyes burning with unshed tears. Gideon Reed resigned from Night Innovations. 6 months later, he founded Nexus Corp with a handful of angel investors. His flagship technology, the one that made him a billionaire, was a new energy cell. He called it the Aura Capacitor. It was my father's Helios Matrix. He stole it. He stole my father's life's work, and Walter Higgins helped him cover it up. Logan stared at the journal, at the proof of a genius's last days. The elegant equations were a silent testament to a grand theft. The sale wasn't a merger. It was the final audacious act of that theft. Gideon Reed wasn't buying Logan's company for its future. He was buying it to bury the evidence of his past, to acquire the one man, Logan, who could potentially expose him and the patents that would legitimize his stolen technology forever. "How did you know about the signing tonight?" Logan asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. "I have a friend who works in catering," she said simply. "She told me Nexus Corp had booked a private dinner at Per Se for a major acquisition. She mentioned your name. I knew. I just knew what it had to be. I begged her to get me on the service staff for the night. I didn't know what I was going to do. I just knew I had to do something." Logan slowly closed the journal. The weight on his shoulders had returned, but it was a different kind of weight now. It wasn't the burden of a legacy ending. It was the crushing gravity of a terrible injustice. He had failed Dimitri Butler. He had allowed his friend, his own CFO, to facilitate the plunder of his company from within. He looked at Reese, this young woman who worked as a waitress to pay for an engineering degree, who carried her father's legacy in a worn-out tote bag. She hadn't just whispered a warning. She had handed him a declaration of war. "Miss Butler." Logan said, his voice now cold and hard as forged steel. "I believe every word you've said. They are not getting my company. But we are not just going to stop the deal. We are going to expose them for what they are." He stood up, his mind already formulating a strategy. "This ends now. But I'll need your help. And your father's journal." For the first time that night, Reese Butler allowed herself a flicker of hope. It was a fragile thing, but in the presence of the billionaire, who now looked at her not as a waitress, but as an ally, it began to grow. The next morning, the 30th floor conference room of the Knight Innovations Tower felt like a pressure cooker. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the New York skyline, a kingdom Logan had helped build. But inside, the atmosphere was glacial. Gideon Reed and his team of lawyers sat on one side of the vast obsidian table, their confidence from the previous night replaced by a simmering impatience. On the other side sat Logan and his own legal counsel, led by the shrewd and unflappable Robert Abernathy. The centerpiece of the table, the $10 billion contract, lay untouched. The designated signing time of 10:00 a.m. came and went. "Logan, is there a problem?" Gideon asked, his voice dangerously smooth. Logan held his gaze. "I'm exercising my right to final due diligence, Gideon. A few internal accounting anomalies have come to my attention. I won't sign until they're clarified." A muscle twitched in Gideon's jaw. "Anomalies? My team and yours have been over the books for 6 months. They're pristine." "Nevertheless," Logan stated, his tone leaving no room for argument, "the signing is postponed indefinitely." He watched as Gideon struggled to maintain his composure, exchanging a dark, fleeting glance with someone behind Logan. Logan didn't need to turn to know who it was. The meeting was dismissed amidst a flurry of whispered legal consultations and thinly veiled threats from the Nexus team. Once they were gone, Logan turned to the man standing by the window, his back to the room. "Walter Higgins." "Walter." Logan said, his voice deceptively calm. "Stay behind. We need to talk." The legal team filed out, leaving the two old friends alone in the cavernous room. The silence stretched thick with unspoken history. "What was that, Logan?" Walter asked, finally turning. His face was a mask of avuncular concern. "You're getting cold feet. This is the best deal we'll ever see. It secures our legacy." "Our legacy, Walter." Logan walked slowly towards him, holding a file in his hand. It was a copy of Dimitri Butler's personnel file, along with the internal review Walter himself had signed off on. "I had a long night, did some reading. I revisited the case of an old employee. a brilliant engineer named Dimitri Butler. The flicker in Walter's eyes was almost imperceptible, but it was there, a shadow of a memory quickly suppressed. Dimitri, yes, sad case, burned out. We had to let him go. We didn't let him go, Walter. You did. Logan said, his voice hardening. He tossed the file onto the table. You authored the report that discredited him. You shelved his project, the Helios Matrix. You told me he was unstable. Walter let out a hollow laugh, shaking his head, as if dealing with a confused child. Logan, you're exhausted. The pressure of this sale is getting to you. Dimitri was a fine engineer, but he went off the deep end, chasing fantasies. The project was a dead end, a money pit. Was it? Logan's voice dropped to a near whisper. Because Gideon Reed's entire empire is built on a technology he calls the aura capacitor, and my experts working overnight with some new information have confirmed it's a one-to-one match with the designs for the Helios Matrix. Dimitri Butler's fantasy made Gideon Reed a billionaire. Walter's face paled, the manufactured concern melting away to reveal a bedrock of fear. That's a ridiculous accusation, a coincidence. Is it a coincidence that Gideon Reed resigned just 1 month after Dimitri died? Logan pressed, stepping closer until he was inches from Walter's face. Is it a coincidence that you were the one who approved his exit package? No questions asked. You the most meticulous CFO in the business. Walter straightened his tie, a nervous, reflexive gesture. Now listen, Logan. You're spinning conspiracies. You're being fed nonsense by someone. Who have you been talking to? The directness of the question, the immediate pivot to an outside influence, was a classic misdirection tactic. It confirmed everything. I trusted you, Walter. Logan said, the anger in his voice now boiling over into raw, agonizing hurt. We built this place together. I thought of you as a brother. When Helen died, you were the one who sat with me, who told me we'd carry on her legacy. Was it all a lie? All of it. This was the moment for a confession, for remorse, for a plea for forgiveness from a man he had loved like family. Instead, Walter's fear hardened into defiance. He drew himself up, his expression turning cold and resentful. A lie. He spat, his voice dripping with the venom Logan had never heard before. I have dedicated 35 years of my life to this company. I sat in your shadow, managing your billions, making sure your vision didn't bankrupt us, while you got all the glory. You were the genius, the titan. I was just Walter the numbers guy. That deal was my payday, my legacy, my chance to finally step out from behind Logan Knight. The confession was more brutal than Logan could have ever imagined. It wasn't just about money. It was about decades of perceived slights of jealousy festering beneath a veneer of friendship. So you helped him, Logan stated the accusation, now a flat, dead certainty. You helped a junior nobody steal from this company from me. You handed him Dimitri's research on a silver platter and destroyed a good man in the process. I protected the company, Walter insisted, his voice rising. Dimitri was unstable. His project would have taken years and hundreds of millions more to develop with no guarantee of success. Reed had the drive, the hunger to make it work. I made a business decision. You made a criminal decision, Logan corrected him, his heart feeling like a block of ice in his chest. You betrayed Dimitri and you betrayed me. Walter stared at him, his face a mixture of fury and panic. He knew he was caught. You can't prove a thing, he bluffed, his voice cracking. It's your word against mine, a grief-stricken old man versus his loyal CFO. Who do you think the board will believe? Logan didn't answer. He simply turned and walked to his desk, picking up the phone. Security. He said, his voice devoid of all emotion. "I need you to escort Walter Higgins from the building. He is not to be allowed back on the premises. His access is revoked effective immediately." Walter stood stunned into silence as two uniformed security guards entered the room. The look on his face was not one of remorse, but of pure, unadulterated hatred. As they led him away, a man stripped of his power and prestige in a matter of seconds, his final words hung in the air like a curse. "You'll regret this, Logan. You have no idea who you're dealing with." Logan stood alone, the sunlight glinting off the skyline. He had won the confrontation, but the victory felt as bitter as ash. The betrayal was real, and he knew with chilling certainty that Walter was right about one thing. This was far from over. He had only scratched the surface of the conspiracy. The dismissal of Walter Higgins sent shockwaves through the financial world. The official story was a disagreement over the postponed Nexus deal, but the rumor mill churned with speculation. Gideon Reed publicly decried Logan's erratic behavior, framing him as an aging founder unable to let go of his company. The narrative was clear. They were trying to paint Logan as unstable, a direct echo of the strategy they had used to destroy Dimitri Butler. Logan knew he was in a race against time. He had Reese's father's journal, a powerful piece of evidence, but it was circumstantial. He needed an unbreakable, irrefutable link between Walter Gideon and the theft of Project Chimera. He needed a ghost of his own. He found him in a dusty, book-lined office in a nondescript building in Tribeca. Frank Miller was a legend in certain circles, a former FBI cybersecurity agent. He was now a private forensic investigator, the man corporate titans called when they needed to find skeletons locked deep inside digital closets. "So you think your best friend of 30 years sold you down the river for a payday?" Frank asked, peering at Logan over his glasses. He was a man who seemed to have been born middle-aged, with a rumpled suit and a perpetually skeptical expression. "I don't think. I know," Logan replied, placing a secure hard drive on Frank's desk. "This contains a complete mirror of our company's servers from 5 to 7 years ago, the period when the theft occurred. I need you to find what Walter buried." He also told Frank about Reese and her father. "The official report on Dimitri Butler is a fabrication. I want you to find the truth. Digital breadcrumbs, erased emails, server logs. Anything that shows Walter and Gideon coordinating." For the next week, Logan's life became a clandestine operation. He continued to go to the office, putting on a brave face for his employees, while secretly funding Frank's deep dive. He met Reese several times, always in discreet locations. She was a wellspring of information, providing details about her father's colleagues, his routines, and the specific technical hurdles he was facing before his dismissal. She was no longer just a victim seeking justice. She was an active partner in the investigation. Her engineering mind saw patterns Logan had missed. The first breakthrough came a few days later. "Got him!" Frank's voice crackled over the encrypted line. Walter was smart. He didn't use company email, but he wasn't smart enough. Frank had discovered a series of encrypted anonymous emails sent from a computer in the Knight Innovations executive wing to a shell company's IP address. The shell company was registered in the Cayman Islands. Frank had managed to crack the encryption on a few of them. They were progress reports, technical data testing parameters, and budget overruns for the Helios matrix sent in real time. The recipient IP traces back to a holding company owned by Gideon Reed's father, Frank explained. "This is your link. Walter was feeding Reed information from the start." It was the confirmation Logan needed, but it still wasn't the whole picture. Why would Walter, a man who was already incredibly wealthy, risk everything? The resentment he'd spewed was a powerful motive, but it felt incomplete. The second, more damning discovery came from a different direction. Frank, acting on a hunch, had looked into Walter's personal life. "Walter Higgins has a son, Leo," Frank reported. "A real piece of work. Gambling debts in Monaco, a failed business venture in Dubai, a taste for things he couldn't afford. He was over $10 million in the hole. About 6 years ago, just as the pressure on Dimitri Butler was mounting, someone started paying off Leo's debts." Logan held his breath. "Let me guess." "The payments were routed through a series of offshore accounts, a complex web designed to be untraceable," Frank said. "But the source account, the one at the very top of the pyramid, belongs to the same holding company owned by Gideon Reed's father. Gideon wasn't just appealing to Walter's jealousy. He was blackmailing him. He owned him." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Gideon had found Walter's weak spot, his wastrel son, and exploited it mercilessly. Walter hadn't just made a business decision. He had been a cornered animal, sacrificing Dimitri to save his own family from ruin and disgrace. The betrayal was deeper and uglier than Logan had ever imagined. But the final piece of the puzzle, the ghost in the machine that would provide the irrefutable proof, was found by Reese. While poring over the technical data Frank had recovered, she noticed something odd in the server logs from the day her father's prototype had suffered its final catastrophic failure. "There was a remote access event," she explained to Logan over a table in a quiet library, her voice hushed with excitement. "It happened at 3:17 a.m. Someone logged into the lab's diagnostic system from an external IP address and altered a single line of code in the coolant regulator. It was made to look like equipment failure," Logan murmured, understanding dawning. "Exactly," Reese said. "But the IP address, it wasn't a Nexus IP. It was registered to a small tech consultancy in Baltimore." Frank Miller ran the name of the consultancy. It had gone out of business 4 years ago. But when he dug into its ownership records, he found the smoking gun. The firm's sole proprietor was Walter Higgins's brother-in-law. They had it all: the motive blackmail, the conspiracy, the secret emails, and the method, the remote sabotage of Dimitri's work. They had a complete, unbroken chain of evidence. "They think they're fighting an old man who's lost his nerve," Logan said to Reese, a grim smile on his face. "They have no idea we've already mapped out their entire conspiracy. Now, we don't just defend, we attack." He knew he couldn't simply take this information to the authorities. A legal battle could drag on for years, mired in technicalities, allowing Gideon to bleed him dry with court costs. No, the crime had been one of public deception and grand theft. The punishment had to be equally public. He picked up his phone and called his head of PR. "Sharon," he said, his voice ringing with newfound authority. "I want you to schedule a press conference, a joint one with Nexus Corp. Tell them I've had a change of heart. Tell them the deal is back on." The news that the Night Nexus deal was back on sent a wave of relief through Wall Street. Knight Innovations stock, which had dipped after the initial postponement, rebounded sharply. Gideon Reed, in an interview with the Wall Street Journal, was magnanimous in victory. "Logan is a legend," he said with a condescending smile. "It's only natural he'd have a moment of hesitation before passing the torch. We're thrilled to move forward together." Behind the scenes, Logan's offices were a whirlwind of controlled chaos. He, Reese Frank Miller, and his lawyer, Robert Abernathy, were planning a corporate counteroffensive on a scale no one had ever seen. "The signing ceremony has to be public," Logan insisted, pacing his office. "Not in a boardroom. I want a full-blown media event. A ballroom, investors, analysts, and every major news network. I want the world to be watching when the truth comes out." Abernathy, ever the cautious lawyer, ran a hand through his thinning hair. "Logan, this is incredibly risky. If we miscalculate, if they get wind of what we're planning, the legal blowback could destroy us. Slander, market manipulation. They'll throw the book at us. They destroyed a man's life and built an empire on a lie. Reese interjected, her voice steady and clear. They forfeited their right to a quiet legal battle. They deserve to be exposed in the same way they operate in the full, unforgiving light of day. Logan looked at her with admiration. In a few short weeks, she had transformed from a nervous waitress into a formidable strategist. Her father's brilliance and tenacity shone through her. "Reese is right," he said. "The risk is the point. They need to believe I am a defeated old man coming to the table to sign their terms. Their arrogance will be their downfall." The plan was audacious. They would set the stage for the signing ceremony, down to the last detail. Logan would play the part of the humbled founder, even agreeing to a few of Gideon's more arrogant last-minute demands on the contract to sell his performance. Meanwhile, Frank Miller was working with a trusted AV team to wire the ballroom. The large screens that were supposed to display celebratory corporate logos would at Logan's signal display Frank's evidence. Instead, Reese's role was crucial. She worked tirelessly translating her father's dense technical journals and Frank's cybersecurity findings into a clear, compelling narrative that a layperson could understand. She created a presentation that would walk the audience through the theft step by step, from the original Helios Matrix schematics to the remote sabotage of the prototype. The most dangerous part of the plan involved Walter Higgins. Logan knew Gideon would want Walter there, a visible symbol of his victory over Knight's old guard. Logan, through back channels, let it be known that as a sign of goodwill, he was dropping all animosity towards Walter and had invited him to the ceremony. It was a poisoned invitation. "Are you sure you can face him?" Reese asked Logan one evening as they worked late, surrounded by documents and takeout containers. Logan stared out at the city lights, his reflection, a ghostly image in the glass. "Facing him is the easy part. It's forgiving myself for trusting him that I'll struggle with. I owed your father my loyalty, and I gave it to his betrayer instead. This is about more than just my company now. It's about restoring Dimitri Butler's name." The day of the ceremony arrived. The grand ballroom of the Four Seasons was packed. Cameras flashed, champagne flowed, and the titans of finance and technology mingled, eager to witness the creation of a new tech superpower. Logan saw Gideon Reed across the room, holding court, radiating triumph. Near him stood Walter Higgins, looking smug and vindicated. He caught Logan's eye and gave a small, condescending nod, a gesture that said, "You see, I won." Logan simply nodded back, his face an unreadable mask. Reese was not in the ballroom. She was in a small control room backstage with Frank Miller, her heart pounding against her ribs. She watched the monitors, her finger hovering over the button that would launch the presentation. "It's almost time," Frank said, his usual skepticism replaced by a tense focus. "You ready, kid?" Reese took a deep breath, clutching a small framed photo of her father that she had brought with her. "For him," she whispered. "I'm ready." On stage, the speeches began. The mayor lauded the deal as a boon for New York City. The lead banker praised the financial ingenuity of both parties. Then Gideon Reed took the podium to a roar of applause. He spoke of the future of innovation, of synergy. He paid a hollow tribute to Logan's legacy, framing the acquisition as a respectful continuation of his work. It was a masterful performance, and the room was captivated. Finally, it was Logan's turn. He walked to the podium, moving like a man carrying a great weight. He looked out at the sea of faces, at the flashing cameras, at the two men who had orchestrated his downfall. He gripped the sides of the lectern, took a long, slow breath, and began to speak. "Thank you, Gideon." He started his voice quiet, but carrying to every corner of the room. You spoke of legacy, and today I want to talk about the true legacy of Knight Innovations. It's not about money or market share. It's about people. Specifically, it's about a man most of you have never heard of. A brilliant engineer, a genius, a man named Dimitri Butler. At the mention of the name, he saw both Gideon and Walter flinch. The trap was sprung. A confused murmur rippled through the ballroom. Who was Dimitri Butler? The name meant nothing to the investors and journalists, but on the faces of Gideon Reed and Walter Higgins, a storm was gathering. Gideon's smile became a rigid line. Walter's smugness evaporated, replaced by a sickly pallor. Dimitri Butler. Logan continued, his voice gaining power and clarity. Was the true architect of the technology that forms the basis of this very deal. He called his invention the Helios Matrix. As he spoke, the words, the massive screens behind him, which were supposed to be showing the gleaming Nexus Corp logo, flickered to life. They didn't show corporate branding. They showed a scanned page from a worn leathered journal. On it, in elegant script, were the words, Helios Matrix Foundational Principles, followed by a series of complex equations. The date was clearly visible at the top of the page 7 years ago. The room fell into a stunned silence. Some of you might know this technology by another name, Logan said, his eyes locking onto Gideon's. Nexus Corp calls it the aura capacitor. The screen changed. A side-by-side comparison appeared Dimitri's original schematics from the journal on one side and the publicly filed patent schematics for the aura capacitor on the other. Even to the untrained eye, the designs were virtually identical. A series of red circles highlighted the direct one-to-one matches in the core architecture. Gasps echoed through the ballroom. Reporters were already scrambling, their phones held up to record the screens. Gideon Reed stood up, his face flushed with fury. What is the meaning of this, Logan? This is an outrage, an absurd fabrication. Is it? Logan's voice was as sharp as broken glass. He gestured to the screen. That is Dimitri Butler's handwriting. This is his journal. But this story isn't just about stolen genius. It's also about a conspiracy to hide the truth. The screen shifted again, displaying the first of the encrypted emails Frank Miller had unearthed. The text was stark against the white background detailing Helios Matrix test results. The sender's source was identified Knight Innovations Executive Network. The recipient, Cayman Holding Corp., subsidiary of Reed Industries. For months, Logan narrated, his voice booming through the speakers. Sensitive proprietary data from my company was leaked directly to a holding company controlled by Gideon Reed's family. The person who sent these emails knew every detail of Dimitri's work because he was Dimitri's supervisor. He was my CFO. He was my friend. Every eye in the room swiveled to Walter Higgins. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost, sweat beading on his forehead, his body trembling. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. But why would a trusted executive do this? Logan asked the crowd rhetorically. The answer, as it so often is leverage. The screen changed to a flow chart. At the top was a picture of Walter's son, Leo. Arrows pointed from his name to images representing casinos and failed luxury businesses. Below them, a list of staggering debts appeared. Then, a new arrow, originating from the Reed Industries holding company, pointed to the debts with the words, "Debts paid in full," in bold red letters. Gideon Reed didn't just buy Walter's loyalty, Logan explained, his voice laced with contempt. He bought his silence by paying off his son's massive gambling debts. It was a classic blackmail scheme. Gideon lunged for the microphone on the table. Lies, this is slander. My lawyers will... And it gets worse, Logan boomed, cutting him off. Discrediting Dimitri wasn't enough. They had to ensure his project failed. They had to destroy the man himself. The final piece of evidence appeared on the screen, the server log. Reese had highlighted the crucial line of code, the remote access IP address, and its timestamp of 3:17 a.m. Next to it, Frank Miller had mapped the IP's origin directly to the tech consultancy owned by Walter Higgins' brother-in-law. "This is the ghost in the machine," Logan declared, his voice ringing with righteous fury. "This is the digital footprint of the sabotage that caused Dimitri's final prototype to fail. This is the act that led to a brilliant man being disgraced, dismissed, and dying of what they called a broken heart." He paused, letting the weight of the evidence sink in. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the frantic clicking of cameras. The story was complete, irrefutable, and utterly devastating. "So no Gideon," Logan said, turning to face his adversary directly. "The deal is not back on. There is no deal. This event was not a signing. It was a reckoning." He then looked past the cameras, past the horrified faces of the investors, as if searching for someone. "And the credit for this revelation doesn't go to me. It goes to a young woman of incredible courage and integrity who risked everything to honor her father's name. A woman I am proud to introduce as the new head of the Butler Legacy Division at Knight Innovations. Ladies and gentlemen, Reese Butler." From the side of the stage, Reese emerged. She was no longer dressed as a waitress, but in a simple professional suit. She walked with her head held high, her eyes shining with tears, but her expression resolute. As she joined Logan at the podium, the room, after a moment of stunned silence, erupted into a deafening wave of applause. It was not for a corporate merger. It was for the truth. Gideon Reed and Walter Higgins stood frozen, bathed in the flash of 100 cameras, their empires and reputations crumbling to dust in a public execution of their own making. Security was already moving towards them. The trap hadn't just been sprung, it had annihilated them. The moment Logan finished speaking, the ballroom was suspended in a state of collective shock. For a heartbeat, the only sound was the hum of the air conditioning. Then chaos erupted. The frantic, blinding strobe of 100 camera flashes descended upon Gideon Reed and Walter Higgins, who stood frozen on the stage like statues in a lightning storm. Their faces, once masks of triumphant arrogance, had crumbled into expressions of raw, undisguised horror. Reporters shouting questions surged toward the stage, a human wave of insatiable curiosity. Amidst the pandemonium, Logan gently guided Reese away from the podium toward the relative quiet of the backstage area. As they stepped through the curtain, the roar of the crowd muffled Reese's composure finally broke. A deep, shuddering sob escaped her, a sound of grief and victory intertwined. Logan placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "You did it, Reese," he said, his own voice thick with emotion. "It's over." She looked up at him, her eyes streaming with tears but shining with a fierce, brilliant light. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling but firm. "We did it." In that moment, backstage, while the world outside was just beginning to process the scandal, they shared a profound understanding. They were no longer a billionaire and a waitress, but two survivors of a devastating betrayal bound by a fight for justice. The fallout was a media supernova. News outlets scrambled to coin a name for the scandal: the Nexus deception, the Butler gambit, the whisper heard round Wall Street. The evidence presented was so complete, so visually damning, that there was no room for spin. By morning, Gideon Reed's face was on the cover of every major newspaper, no longer the visionary wunderkind, but the poster child for corporate greed. His resignation was announced before the markets opened a futile attempt to stop the hemorrhaging of Nexus Corp's stock value. It was no use. The company was toxic, a monument to a lie, and within weeks it was forced into a fire sale, its assets picked apart by competitors. For Walter Higgins, the end was even more precipitous. Stripped of his reputation and facing a mountain of irrefutable evidence, he found himself utterly alone. The final, cruelest cut came from his own son. Leo Higgins, in a desperate act of self-preservation, agreed to become the prosecution's star witness in exchange for immunity, publicly detailing the years of blackmail and his father's complicity. The betrayal had devoured its own. The arrests of both Gideon and Walter were broadcast live, a humiliating end to their reign of deceit. Logan, however, steered his company away from celebrating the downfall of his enemies. His focus turned inward toward healing and restoration. His first official act was to hold a ceremony not for investors, but for the employees of Knight Innovations. In the company's main atrium, he formally renamed Project Chimera. This technology was born from the mind of a genius, Logan announced to the assembled crowd, his voice echoing in the vast space. And it will forever bear his name. It is now and always will be the Butler Helios Project. He then unveiled a bronze plaque dedicating the R&D wing to Dimitri Butler and posthumously awarded him the Knight Medal of Innovation, the company's highest honor. He presented the medal to Reese, who accepted it with quiet dignity. She gave a short, powerful speech, not about complex equations, but about her father's love for creation, his belief in integrity, and his favorite worn-out sweater he always put on when he was close to a breakthrough. She made him real to them, a human being whose legacy had been rescued from the ashes. True to his word, Logan established the Butler Legacy Division. Reese, as its inaugural head, threw herself into the work. It wasn't a token position. It was a well-funded, independent branch of the company, tasked with finding and nurturing the Dimitri Butlers of the world. She spent her days reviewing proposals from brilliant, unconventional minds, offering grants and resources to those whose ideas were too bold or too strange for traditional venture capital. She was building a sanctuary for genius. A few months later, Logan found her in the newly completed Dimitri Butler Innovation Lab. It was less a corporate space and more a shrine to the creative spirit. Glass cases held some of her father's old tools, a favorite slide rule, a battered multimeter, polished and preserved. On the wall, a massive, high-resolution photograph of her father dominated the room. It was a candid shot showing him laughing, his eyes crinkling with kindness and intelligence. Reese stood before it, lost in thought. "He would be so proud of you," Logan said softly, his footsteps silent on the polished concrete floor. Reese turned, a small, sad smile gracing her lips. "He would be proud of us," she corrected him gently. He always believed that integrity was the most important component in any design. He'd be happy to know the company is finally in the hands of someone who believes that too. The air between them was comfortable, filled with the quiet respect of comrades who had been through a war together. The immense social and economic chasm that had once separated them felt like a distant memory. "I've been thinking about the future," Logan said, his gaze drifting to the photo of the man he had failed so long ago. "Not just for the company, but for me. For 40 years, this place has been my entire world. It was a monument to my ambition. When Helen died, it became a monument to her memory. But I realize now, a legacy isn't something you build and sell. It's a living thing. It's something you pass on." He turned back to Reese, his eyes clear and resolved. "I'm not retiring. My mind is still sharp. But I am stepping back as CEO. This company needs new energy. It needs a vision that isn't rooted in the past, but one that can see the future." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the quiet lab. "The board has unanimously agreed with my recommendation. We want you to join as our new Chief Innovation Officer. You'll have complete oversight of the company's technological direction. No red tape. No committees to slow you down. Reese was speechless, her mind struggling to process the scale of his words. Chief Innovation Officer. It was a breathtaking offer. But that's not the end of it, Reese. Logan continued, his voice earnest. I see this as a transition. I want to mentor you. I want you to learn the business inside and out. In time, I hope you'll consider taking over the whole thing. It's what your father would have wanted. It's what Helen would have wanted. This company should be led by a builder, not a banker. It needs a soul. You have that. She looked from her father's smiling face in the photograph to Logan's hopeful, tired eyes. He wasn't just offering her a job. He was offering her atonement, a chance to right a generational wrong. It was the ultimate restoration of her family's name. A chance to ensure the spirit of her father, the spirit of true, honest innovation, would guide the company for decades to come. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. But this time, it was not a tear of sorrow. It was a tear of profound, overwhelming gratitude. Yes, Logan. She said, her voice clear and steady, imbued with the weight of the legacy she was now ready to carry. Yes, I will. He smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile that seemed to lift years from his face. Together they turned to a large, smart screen on the wall, which displayed the initial schematics for a new, ambitious project. A legacy had not been sold, but had been reborn. And in the heart of a global corporation, a new partnership was taking its first step, not defined by a contract written in ink, but by a promise forged in the fires of integrity and truth. The story of Logan Knight and Reese Butler is a powerful reminder that true strength isn't measured in billions of dollars, but in the courage to do what's right, even when the odds are stacked against you. It shows that a single voice, armed with the truth, can be more powerful than the most formidable corporate empire. Reese's whisper was a spark that ignited a revolution, proving that heroes aren't always the ones in the boardroom. Sometimes they're the ones who see an injustice and refuse to look away. What would you have done in her shoes? What would you have done in his? If this story of courage, betrayal, and ultimate vindication resonated with you, please take a moment to hit that like button. It truly helps our channel grow. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that one person can make a difference. And for more incredible stories that inspire and make you think, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Let us know your favorite part of the story in the comments below. We read every single one. Thank you for watching.